So, topic of the day, empathy. Do you have it? We'll find out. So this image, the reason I'm using it is because it does such a good job of showing you what someone who has empathy might look like, right? They're giving you their full attention, they're listening, they're maybe even mirroring your emotions. So we'll break all of those different components down, which I think is super exciting and interesting. Now, if you had to define empathy in your own words, what would that be? I'd love for you to just think about that for a moment here. For me, I find it's easier to describe it more as a feeling versus an actual definition. Like, I don't know if I have an actual definition for it. Okay, we will talk about the actual definition of what like Google says, and then we'll also talk about what psychologists say and different personality traits that usually are seen as empathetic, okay? In general, when we think about humans, we're social animals, right? Like, we want to be around people. When we are around people, it releases oxytocin, which is that happiness hormone, right? So we want to identify, connect, and grow with others. And so obviously having empathy is kind of a superpower if you see yourself as a social person and if you want to continue to have those thriving social relationships, okay? Which is obviously beneficial, whether that be for your personal life or your professional life. Hey, we got Joe in the house. Hello, welcome. So if this is you, if you're like, you know what, Shin, I'm actually more of a loner. Like, I like to be alone. I enjoy being by myself. And some of us have that natural inclination, right? So in the contrast, some of us also have that natural inclination towards empathy, right? To feel the feelings of others. So I would say that empathy is actually introvert and extrovert agnostic, okay? So it doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you think you resonate with. It's not easy or difficult based on your natural tendency, okay? What I will say, though, is if you enjoy solitude and if you are a lone wolf, then empathy may drain your energy because you automatically have to put yourself in other people's shoes, have to sort of see things from their perspective. So it might be a bit more challenging for you. Now, if you are an introvert and you're also highly sensitive, then chances are you are already inclined towards empathy, but then we'll talk about how to control this skill. Because with all things, I feel like there is a too much and then a too little, right? So if you have the too little, let's dial it up. And then if you have the too much, how do we bring it more to like a balanced state? Fair? Yeah, Joe, I remember that Joe is Kyle. I know this. Thank you so much for reminding me. I'm gonna reduce my volume because it looks like it's going to like the blaring area, okay? And I tend to be a bit passionate when I speak, so if it's too loud, let me know. So if we look at emotional intelligence, okay? Emotional intelligence, the one that I feel like we don't really talk about a lot, but we should talk about a lot because there's a lot of research that shows, well, actually, there's this one big study that I'm referring to in my head. I don't have the link for you, but I'll put it in the description if I can find it. So basically, this study looked at teenagers to 20-year-olds, okay? And so they looked at the same individuals over time, and they noticed that emotional intelligence has been steadily declining over time, okay? So that's not a good stat in my opinion, right? Because emotional intelligence, again, it's the thing that helps you connect with others, is the thing that helps you connect with yourself, have emotional regulation, all of those good things that make us balanced, stable human beings, right? So if we look at emotional intelligence as this pool, as this ambiguous, amorphous kind of pool, in that pool, we have self-awareness, right? The higher your self-awareness, perhaps you can dial up or dial down emotional intelligence. Now, if you have a healthy, accurate form of self-awareness, then chances are you are able to build that empathy. So think of empathy as almost as a step 2. The step 1 would be self-awareness. So are you aware of your own emotions? right? Are you aware when your emotions change, when you are too heightened, and maybe when you're bringing in too little emotion? Are you able to flex that emotion? That is what I would say is like self-awareness from the emotional angle, okay? And then from there, you kind of dial up and level up to empathy. So empathy, definition. Remember I asked you in the beginning, how would you define it? For me, I would say it's like having the power to step into other people's shoes as if they were your own. And that's like the colloquial definition we'll go with, okay? But the real definition, according to Google, is empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. And so be able to take other people's perspectives. Let's just get a gauge. Is that you? Do you feel like, yeah, you know what? I'm pretty good at understanding and sharing the feelings of others. I'm pretty good at taking someone else's perspective. Okay? You might also have improved sensitivity towards others' feelings, and you might be better at listening to others. Okay? So me, I'm going to reflect on my own. So me being a speaker, I talk a lot. And so naturally, I don't listen as well. So for me, listening is definitely a skill that I need to work on. And in that sense, well, maybe I don't have the most empathy, right? Sensitivity to others' feelings, yeah, I'll say yeah, but at the same time, there's definitely room for improvement. So there's always room for improvement. I want you to not be self-critical, but more just notice and observe where you are today. A really cool image, and I thought this did a good job of like depicting empathy. So nowadays we have super cool research tools, right? So functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is fMRI for short. So this helps us see images of our brain, okay? So we can now give people images of things, give people statements or scenarios of things, and we can see how their brain lights up through this fMRI scan, okay? Very cool stuff. Now through that, we found, and we as a collective, found that empathetic individuals exhibit unconscious mimicry of other people. So whether it's postures or mannerisms or facial expressions, if you are empathetic, you automatically will mirror those things. Now, I want to give you an example, which I think is very popular from The Office, right? Who is the guy who, oh my God, what was his name? I want to say Andrew, but I don't think it was. Andy? I think it was Andy. But he would always mirror people's expressions to the point where it was mocking them, right? So you can't just hear that and be like, okay, I'm gonna mirror whatever anybody else does. It's more of a subtle mimicry, okay? It's more of if someone's nodding, you kind of nod lightly, right? If someone's smiling, you kind of smile too. So it's subtle versus overtly mimicking them, okay? Because that's just annoying. Fair? Hey, we got John in the house. What's up? So John is saying, I feel like it's easy to know how someone feels as long as I can see their eyes. So let's talk about that, John, because we are now in a world where we are spending more and more time virtually, right? Especially if you think about the metaverse where like you see avatars of people. So even though you can see their eyes, it's not really their eyes, you know what I mean? There's no emotion in that. And so as we move towards this virtual world, how do we hold on to the things that make us human? How do we hold on to these things like empathy, like emotional intelligence, like having self-awareness of ourselves and not just like, kind of looking at ourselves in our own reflection, but being in the moment? How do we do these things? How do we keep it alive? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Cool. Okay. Now, here's a cool study where they actually looked at female volunteers. They took 16 female volunteers and they had their brains scanned while they were receiving painful electric shocks to their hands, okay? To their hands. So while they received the shock, they had this thing called a pain matrix where, they rated their level of pain. And afterwards, when they received a signal that their spouses were getting that same pain, like level shock, the females' brains lit up in those same pain areas. So it was almost like they were feeling the pain again. But even though it was their spouse that was feeling the pain, they were able to feel that pain in real time because their brain fired the same way when they were receiving the electric shocks, okay? So we are naturally built for empathy. I'm not going to say that it's like a non-human skill. Like, it's a very human skill. And the better we get at reading our emotions, reading other people's emotions, so awesome job, Joe, then we are going to end up naturally being tuned towards having more empathy, okay? And there's different types of empathy. We're going to talk about 3 different types of empathy today. So I want you to just keep that in mind, because being empathetic all the time is draining emotionally, okay? So I wouldn't say that that's something that you want to aim for. It's more about having that balanced approach, okay? So, empathy versus sympathy. I used to use these words interchangeably until empathy became a buzzword, and then I started looking into it more. But I've seen people use this interchangeably as well. Now, here is a visual distinction between empathy and sympathy, okay? So for those of you who have heard of Brené Brown, she's a speaker. She talks a lot about psychology-related topics. And she had this beautiful metaphor of describing the difference between empathy and sympathy. So imagine, this is a picture of like, you're kind of in a hole. It's super dark. So imagine that there's someone down in that hole, okay? And the person who has sympathy is up on the higher ground, and they're looking down at that person and being like, oh my God, it sucks to be you right now. Like, oh man, I've been in a hole before and it was the worst. Okay, so that's sympathy, where you're feeling bad for the person, but you're not necessarily in the hole with them. Okay, and that's the biggest difference with empathy. With empathy, someone who is on the higher ground and sees somebody in the hole, they would climb down and they would sit next to you and they would be with you in that moment, and they might even figure out a way to help get you out of it, but that isn't going to be their first tendency, okay? So you notice how I said that? Because a lot of us will try to jump to solution, especially when someone is like venting or upset or has gone through a traumatic experience. We might be like, oh yeah, don't worry, this too shall pass. And then we try to find solutions, and that may not be what the person wants at that time. So if you are someone who jumps to solutions, AKA me, I do this a lot, might be a sign that you're not as empathetic, okay? Everybody, we have this inner desire to be heard, to be seen, right? To be valued, to be loved, right? Everyone wants that. I haven't met anyone who doesn't want that yet. If you have, please let me know. But when that need isn't met, that need to be heard, that need to be seen, to be valued, to be loved, we may lash out or we may distance ourselves, right? So we may get into fight or flight. So empathy is this masterful way of bringing people closer and diffusing that tension, because you automatically relate to them, right? You're like, oh, I see what you're saying. I understand that. Or help me understand that. What about this, right? You're seeking to understand. Now, I want to be very clear for anyone who may be, very outwardly oriented, that you care about what other people think, you care if other people are happy or not. So that would be people pleasing, right? Empathy is not people pleasing. Some people might see empathy as a weakness, and I think that those people may not understand empathy completely. People pleasing absolutely is a weakness, because you automatically devalue your own priorities and you overvalue other priorities, right? So over time, you're going to just deplete your own need for compassion towards yourself, right? At the end of the day, you want to be empathetic to yourself first, so that then you can show up with empathy for others. Fair? So I'm going to call empathy the skill of influence, and here's a really cool study to actually back it up. And they did this study with doctors, okay? So doctors who have empathy, when they treat their clients, they automatically show up in a way that's more deliberate, right? They're listening, they're understanding, and then they're proposing solutions. And what ends up happening is those patients end up being more satisfied, and they follow through with their treatment recommendations. So they're more likely to do what the doctor suggested they do, okay? In contrast, Doctors who have low empathy, when we look at their patients often are dissatisfied with the treatment that they got and likely to not follow through with the recommendations. That is pretty insane, right? Because when you think about the way that we teach doctors, we're almost desensitizing them, right? We want them to be kind of have that armor, right? Of like, yep, I've seen this before, this is this and that is that. So that those scenarios tend to numb their brains in a way towards high emotion, because like a hospital, so much emotion in a hospital, right? But training doctors to have empathy actually results in a much better client or patient relationship and patient follow through with their recommendations. Like, I just think that needs to be part of courses. Do you know what I mean? It needs to happen. Cool. David Schneider, thank you so much for sharing that, Joe. Okay, so with that said, hopefully you're sold. You're like, yes, I need more empathy in my life. How do I do this? There are 3 components of empathy, okay? And this comes from Daniel Goleman and Paul Ekman. They're both psychologists. They apparently co-defined these 3 components. So the first one is cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is simply knowing how the other person feels and what they might be thinking. Okay, so this is really like perspective taking. You're able to see how they either feel or how they are thinking. Cognitive empathy, okay? So your heart, your emotions are not involved here. It's just your cognitive lens. That's it. Second type of empathy is called emotional empathy. So this is when you feel physically what the other person is feeling. It's almost like emotions are contagious, okay? So this is a little bit like, if someone is receiving pain, a pain shock, an electric shock, your brain lights up in the same way as though you are feeling that pain, like that study we looked at, right, with the female volunteers. So emotional empathy, if you are someone who is an empath and you're maybe surrounding yourself with people who are often in high emotional states or people who have traumatic events, then you might come home depleted from the day, right? Because you are feeling these feelings. It's like you went through them yourself. So being high in emotional empathy, I'd love to kind of ask you what you think. Do you think that's productive to your own goals and desires? Yes or no? Your thoughts would be valued there. And then the last one, and this is what John was referring to, this is compassionate empathy, okay? Now, John, this may be different from your definition or how you were thinking about it, so please feel free to share, your thoughts here. But compassionate empathy, from what we understand, is when people not only understand what you're feeling and what you're thinking, they also feel it, and they will go that step further where they'll help you figure out a solution, okay? So they're spontaneously moved to help. They're moved to help. So this, I would say, is kind of like a balance between cognitive and emotional, because cognitive, you're just thinking the things and you might not be feeling anything, you might not take any action towards it. Emotional, you're feeling all the feels, but you might not know how to take any solution towards it, or you might be drained and you might not be able to act towards it, right? And then compassionate is like that action-taking part of you where not only do you think and feel, you also are moved to help, okay? Now, this is the opposite from just jumping into a problem-solving process, right? Because if you just jump into a problem-solving process, you may not have gone through the emotional connection or the cognitive connection. You may just have seen, hey, this is a problem to solve and I'm trying to solve it. So in that sense, we would say you do not classify as someone who has empathy, and that wouldn't be classified as compassionate empathy, okay? Yeah, John. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the person, right? So you're saying I haven't seen ever a good reason as to why I should feel sad alongside someone else and how that will help things. I can agree to a certain extent. It really depends, right? So if this person is a stranger, do your own thing, you know what I mean? But if this person is someone that you really care about, so say it's a spouse or say it's a family member, then you don't have to feel their feelings necessarily, but just even being with them and talking through it with them and helping them, share their experience might help them come out of that situation. So it's a way to connect socially and not necessarily a way for you to bring yourself down, right? We're not saying do that. It's more about a way to connect and build that bridge with someone else, okay? And I can see someone, finding that to be a useless waste of time, especially if you prioritize time, if you have your own goals, you got to get going. Yeah, chances are people like that may not have time for empathy, because at the end of the day, empathy requires time and energy. And who has that these days? So let's talk about some tactics of how exactly do we practice empathy in real life. So first of all is you want to be self-empathetic, okay? So compassion for yourself. You gotta care for yourself first to see what that feels like. That self-love, when you have it, you want that for other people. Okay, and this isn't just like the superficial get a massage and have a scented bath. This is the real tough stuff, right? So putting yourself through a marathon and kind of talking through it, right? What does that feel like? What does that self-empathy feel like? How does the training process feel like for you? Are you empathetic towards your rest days, towards pain, towards your self-talk, right? How do you keep that balance of pushing yourself and being objective of no, I promised myself I would do this, so I'm gonna, versus also being I think I might, hurt my knee forever, so I'm gonna take a day of rest or whatever, okay? So having that self-empathy. Second is to be curious. I think curiosity is such an underrated skill. Oh my goodness, okay? You cannot train people to be curious. You almost have to have that curiosity come from within. So can you be curious about the people that you love, that you want in your life? This is not to be empathetic to everybody. It's just not possible, I don't think. I think that if you did that, you would be a selfless servant to the world, okay? So if that is your goal, go for it. Be empathetic towards everyone. But for most of us, I think we're gonna try to be empathetic towards the people that we love, the people that we wanna build relationships with. So how can you be curious about them? What are they doing? How are they feeling? What do they want to do with their lives? What's their vision? What are they afraid of? Whatever. How do you be curious? Go beyond that small talk and have deep, meaningful, rich conversations with people. Day in the life. Are you able to follow along on someone's day in the life? I think this is really useful if you are someone who's trying to sell a product or a service or trying to create a product or a service. Can you get into the mindset of your client or consumer or customer? Can you follow through on their routine? What does that look like? So actually do it with them and put yourself in their shoes. That is automatically going to make you more empathetic. If you're able to work in community settings. So for example, we just signed up for a community garden this summer, and we met a whole bunch of people who were literally growing their food, and their lifestyles were different. Some of them had families, some of them didn't, some of them were teaching their kids how to grow stuff. So it's really cool to have that sense of community where you have one interest that maybe overlaps, but then you also get to see other aspects of people's lives. So either you are, maybe you like politics and you're doing some kind of political organizing, right? Talking to those people, seeing where they come from. Even though they're similar to you because they have that same political inclination, they might be very different from you in other ways, right? So, if you are feeling lonely and if you are feeling like you want that social connection and you want to practice your empathy, join some kind of community in your locality, okay? Is locality a word? Sounds like it, okay. Facial expressions. So Joe, you were saying this before, that you're getting better at reading other people's emotions. That's great. Everybody has a set of micro expressions and facial expressions that are universal, okay? Things like anger, happiness, sadness, disgust, contempt. And there's another one, maybe, did I say anger already? I don't remember, but there's another one. There's like 6 common emotions that everybody feels, and everybody shows them on their face the same way. That's a universal language, right? So learning how to read other people's emotions is very important. If we are continuing to be in a virtual world, how do we get that, like, that need met to be able to see other people's emotions so that we can like connect with them better? For me, I just try to get people to turn their webcam on, you know? Some people might hate it, some people might like it, but you're actually going to connect with them better if you are able to see their face, okay? So if you're having any kind of argument with someone and you're doing it over text or on the phone, please stop. Just go see them in person if you can, okay? Or FaceTime, right? Technology makes this possible for us, yes. So let's try that. Or maybe technology will get better, and when we have avatars of ourselves, it'll move in all the nuances that we have built into our faces. Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, practicing reading facial expressions, even if you're watching TV, very helpful, okay? Ooh, that person doesn't look like they're lying. It doesn't look like they're telling the truth, right? Can you tell stuff like that? That's really cool. And this is a super fun game that you can play with other people of like finding things that you have in common without talking about superficial things. So like, oh, we both have black hair, or oh, we both have brown eyes. Instead of going like, can you go a bit deeper? So, oh, we have a dog. Ooh, we like animals, or we have pets or whatever. So how can you go a bit deeper to find those commonalities with people? Because automatically that will make you more empathetic. Because if you remember earlier, we talked about that evolutionary bias where you end up feeling empathy. You're just geared this way, right? This is your default. Where you end up feeling empathy towards people who are similar to you. So the more you can find those things in common beyond superficial features, you're automatically getting to that level deeper of like, whoa, we're actually really similar, even though, you know, visually we might not actually be, okay? And then finally, give and receive feedback. The more you give feedback in a way that is caring and supportive and creating a safe space for someone, they're going to be very appreciative and respectful of that. At the same time, you don't want to give feedback to people who are not open to it. So please ask someone if they're open to feedback, or only give it when they're asking for it themselves. But one thing you can do to create that environment is to ask for feedback yourself. So hey, I would love to ask you this. What kind of content can I create on here that you would find really valuable? Whether that's through live streams or videos or just funny shorts, like what would you like to see? I would love to hear feedback around what's working, what's not working. Feel free to share it, right? And I think this really opens your eyes up to your blind spots, pun intended, because then you'll be able to see all of the things that you may not even be aware of. And it's just going to make you a holistically better rounded person, well-rounded person. Fair? And that is all for today's stream. So hopefully you got actual tactical steps to practice empathy. You know the 3 different components of empathy, right? Head, heart, action. And then you also understand that empathy is a spectrum. It's not something that you just kind of have one day. You can choose to dial it up or dial it down based on who you're with and where you are.